In a region where history bleeds into every border and ancient rivalries burn beneath the surface of modern diplomacy, one question demands urgent clarity. Why does the world sit on edge when Iran and Israel stand at odds? This isn't just about two nations. This is about the future of global peace, nuclear threats, and a ticking clock we can no longer afford to ignore. Stay with me. The roots of hostility between Iran and Israel run deep, not merely in terms of political tension or regional rivalry, but in the fundamental ideological divide that has shaped each nation's identity, purpose, and posture in the world. To understand the core of this animosity, one must go beyond current headlines and military clashes. One must delve into the philosophical, religious, and historical underpinnings that have defined how each state views itself and how each interprets the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the other. Israel, established in 1948 as a homeland for the Jewish people following the horrors of the Holocaust, represents more than a state. It represents survival, a cultural rebirth, and a strategic outpost of democracy in a region often defined by authoritarian rule. For Israelis, the very notion of their existence is rooted in the idea that after centuries of persecution and exile, Jews must never again rely on the goodwill of others for their safety. Embedded within the Israeli psyche is a doctrine of vigilance, self-reliance, and existential urgency. Israel is not just a country, it is a lifeline, a declaration of never again, written into national policy, military readiness, and global diplomacy. But this foundational narrative stands in direct contrast to the ideology of the Islamic Republic of Iran. After the 1979 revolution, Iran underwent a complete transformation. The monarchy of the Shah was overthrown and replaced by a theocratic regime under Ayatollah Khomeini, who positioned Iran not merely as a sovereign state, but as the vanguard of Islamic revolution. This new regime viewed the West, and particularly Israel, not just as geopolitical opponents, but as moral corruptors, illegitimate actors in a sacred landscape. Israel, in the eyes of the Iranian clerical elite, was a colonial imposition, a foreign transplant on Islamic land, and a symbol of Western arrogance. From its earliest days, the Islamic Republic made opposition to Israel a pillar of its identity. Anti-Zionist rhetoric was not simply political, it was theological, it was revolutionary, and it was laced into the constitution of the new Islamic State. This ideological divide has since morphed into a persistent narrative within Iran's political and religious discourse. State-sponsored television, education systems, Friday sermons, and political speeches often frame Israel as the Little Satan, a proxy of the United States, the Great Satan. This framing is not just rhetorical flourish. It reflects a worldview that sees Israel as a threat, not because of its actions alone, but because of what it represents. Secularism, liberalism, Western hegemony, and a perceived moral decay that Iran's leaders seek to resist at all costs. Within this ideological lens, resistance to Israel is not optional. It is a divine duty. On the Israeli side, this ideological threat is taken with utmost seriousness. The combination of genocidal rhetoric from Iranian leaders, funding of anti-Israel terrorist groups, and repeated calls for the destruction of the Jewish state has created a deep-seated perception that Iran's hostility is not negotiable. Israelis remember well the threats they've faced, from Arab coalitions in 1948, 1967, and 1973 to modern threats from Hezbollah and Hamas, both of which receive significant support from Tehran. The idea that a powerful regional adversary openly denies Israel's right to exist and simultaneously seeks nuclear capabilities creates a climate of permanent alertness, even paranoia within Israeli defense strategy. Their Air Force, intelligence community, and cyber units are shaped by the belief that waiting to be attacked is no longer an option. This long-standing hostility has also manifested in cultural and symbolic acts. Iran, for example, has banned any recognition of Israel on its maps, referring to it only as the Zionist regime. Israeli athletes are boycotted by Iranian competitors in international tournaments. Iranian newspapers frequently publish Holocaust denial content, while Israeli media responds by highlighting Iran's human rights violations, funding of terror, and repression at home. The animosity has extended far beyond the battlefield. It has seeped into literature, diplomacy, sport, and scholarship, making reconciliation not just a political challenge, but a psychological one. Both nations have constructed internal narratives that not only justify their positions, but elevate them to moral imperatives. A telling example of how deeply entrenched this divide is can be seen in how Iran reacted to the normalization of relations between Israel and several Arab countries under the Abraham Accords. While nations like the UAE and Bahrain saw peace with Israel as a pragmatic step toward economic growth and regional stability, Iran condemned the move as betrayal. Iranian officials warned of divine revenge and accused the signatories of selling out the Palestinian cause. To Tehran, peace with Israel is not just a geopolitical maneuver, it is heresy. This response underscores the fact that, for Iran, hostility toward Israel is not merely an issue of foreign policy, but a central tenet of revolutionary identity. Meanwhile, Israel's perspective on Iran has grown increasingly uncompromising. Where previous decades saw Israeli leaders entertaining back-channel diplomacy and regional confidence building, the rise of Iran's nuclear program has turned ideological opposition into an acute strategic threat. Israeli leaders, from Netanyahu to Bennett, have repeatedly emphasized that Iran poses an existential danger, one that cannot be reasoned with, but must be contained, dismantled, or neutralized. This belief is not just based on military calculations. It is deeply rooted in historical trauma. The collective memory of the Holocaust, combined with modern Iranian calls for annihilation, creates a psychological reality where preemption feels like a moral obligation. Thus, the hostility between Iran and Israel cannot be reduced to simple territorial disputes or policy disagreements. It is a clash of identities, forged by revolution and survival, faith and memory. Iran views Israel as an intruder, a moral threat, and a symptom of Western injustice. Israel views Iran as an existential danger, a sponsor of terror, and an uncompromising enemy. Neither side sees the other as merely mistaken. They see the other as dangerous to the very fabric of their own nationhood. Iran's support for anti-Israel proxies is one of the most significant and enduring features of its foreign policy, and it serves as both a strategic tool and an ideological weapon. This support is not a recent phenomenon, nor a covert initiative. It is an openly acknowledged, deeply institutionalized part of Iran's approach to countering Israel's influence in the Middle East. Through financial aid, military training, weapons supplies, intelligence sharing, and political backing, Iran has cultivated a network of non-state actors that operate on Israel's borders and within contested territories. These proxies, chiefly Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas, and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, function as extensions of Iran's regional ambitions, allowing Tehran to apply pressure on Israel without engaging in direct warfare. Hezbollah stands as the most formidable example of Iran's proxy strategy. Founded in the early 1980s during the Lebanese Civil War and in response to Israel's invasion of southern Lebanon, Hezbollah was nurtured under the guidance of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. The group adopted the ideological framework of Iran's Islamic Revolution, including loyalty to the supreme leader of Iran, and has since become a political, military, and social powerhouse within Lebanon. Through Iran's sustained support, Hezbollah has evolved from a guerrilla organization into a heavily armed militia with tens of thousands of fighters and a stockpile of advanced weaponry, including precision-guided missiles capable of striking deep into Israeli territory. It is estimated that Iran supplies Hezbollah with hundreds of millions of dollars annually, along with weaponry transported through Syria and via underground networks. This support has translated into repeated violent confrontations between Hezbollah and Israel, most notably the 2006 Lebanon War. In that month-long conflict, Hezbollah fired over 4,000 rockets into northern Israel, forcing the evacuation of entire towns and cities, and demonstrating the group's capacity to hold Israeli civilians hostage to regional tensions. Israel, in turn, launched a massive military campaign that devastated southern Lebanon and resulted in widespread civilian casualties. Though the war ended in a UN-brokered ceasefire, it did not resolve the underlying issue that Iran, through Hezbollah, had created a permanent military threat on Israel's northern border. The continued presence of Hezbollah rockets in Lebanon, some now with improved guidance systems, represents a constant security dilemma for Israel and a powerful reminder of Iran's reach. In the Gaza Strip, Iran has applied a similar strategy, though with different actors and dynamics. Hamas, an Islamist organization that governs Gaza, has received various levels of support from Iran over the years, despite occasional ideological rifts, particularly over the Syrian civil war. Alongside Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, is another major beneficiary of Iranian patronage. While Hamas maintains a more nationalist tone, PIJ aligns closely with Iran's vision of resistance, and its leadership has openly acknowledged Iran's role in supplying funds, weapons, and training. Through these groups, Iran has enabled thousands of rocket attacks into southern and central Israel, often during flare-ups, such as the 2021 conflict that saw over 4,000 rockets launched from Gaza in less than 2 weeks. These rockets, many of which are manufactured locally using Iranian blueprints or imported parts, serve not only to terrorize Israeli civilians, but also to stretch Israel's Iron Dome defense system, test its military capabilities, and create cycles of violence that delegitimize Israeli control and galvanize anti-Israel sentiment worldwide. Iran's involvement doesn't stop at weapons and training. The regime uses its state media, diplomatic channels, and religious networks to legitimize and glorify the actions of these groups. Iranian leaders regularly refer to members of Hezbollah and Palestinian resistance groups as heroes of the resistance, framing their actions not as terrorism, but as a righteous struggle against oppression. Iran hosts international Quds Day rallies each year, calling for the liberation of Jerusalem from Israeli control, and uses these events to reinforce its ideological commitment to the destruction of the Israeli state. This messaging isn't limited to internal audiences. It's broadcast across the Muslim world, seeking to recruit hearts and minds to Iran's cause and sow instability around Israel's borders. Another important aspect of Iran's proxy strategy lies in its influence in Syria. As the Syrian civil war unfolded, Iran saw an opportunity not only to support its ally, Bashar al-Assad, but also to entrench itself militarily along Israel's northeastern frontier. The IRGC, along with Hezbollah fighters and other Iranian-backed militias, began operating bases and missile sites in Syrian territory, some within striking distance of Israeli cities. These moves were perceived in Tel Aviv as part of a larger encirclement strategy, an Iranian ambition to create a land bridge from Tehran to the Mediterranean, allowing for easier weapons transfers and quicker military mobilization in any future conflict with Israel. In response, Israel has launched hundreds of airstrikes in Syria, targeting Iranian convoys and facilities in an attempt to thwart what it sees as the next front in a potential multi-theater war. The danger of Iran's proxy network lies not only in its firepower, but in its asymmetry. These groups do not wear uniforms or operate within state borders in the traditional sense. They blend into civilian populations, operate under the radar, and exploit the complexities of international law to wage war without official declaration. This ambiguity serves Iran's interests perfectly. It allows Tehran to maintain a posture of deniability while fueling instability that bleeds Israel economically, militarily, and diplomatically. It's a strategy of attrition, of long-term erosion, where the battlefield is not just land, but morale, perception, and international will. Through this strategy, Iran is not only challenging Israel's physical security, but also its ability to maintain global legitimacy and internal cohesion amid a constant, unpredictable threat. Israel's fear of a nuclear Iran is not rooted in mere geopolitical anxiety or traditional rivalry. It is a deeply existential concern shaped by history, ideology, and a profound sense of vulnerability that permeates the national consciousness. For Israel, the idea of a hostile regime like the Islamic Republic of Iran possessing nuclear weapons is not a tolerable risk or a negotiable red line. It is an absolute threat to national survival. This fear is reinforced not only by Iran's repeated public declarations against Israel's existence, but also by its tangible efforts to advance its nuclear program, often in defiance of international scrutiny and oversight. For a small nation surrounded by adversaries, many of whom have questioned its legitimacy since the day it was founded, the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran is a nightmare scenario that informs everything from military doctrine to foreign policy strategy. The historical backdrop of this fear is critical to understand. The Holocaust is not a distant memory in Israel. It is a defining trauma that informs a national ethos built on the principle of never again. This history has instilled in Israelis a permanent wariness about the potential for genocidal threats to materialize if left unchecked. When Iranian leaders refer to Israel as a cancerous tumor that must be wiped off the map, these are not viewed as rhetorical flourishes or political bluster. They are interpreted as echoes of a catastrophic past, warnings that, if ignored, could lead to future annihilation. This unique historical sensitivity means that threats that might be shrugged off by other nations are taken with deadly seriousness in Israel. The fear is not just about destruction, but about extermination, about the very erasure of a people from the map of history. Israel's intelligence community has closely monitored Iran's nuclear ambitions for decades. It has gathered substantial evidence indicating that Iran's nuclear program, though often framed as peaceful by Iranian officials, has involved secret enrichment facilities, warhead design studies, and long-range missile development, all of which are hallmarks of a military-oriented nuclear agenda. The discovery of Iran's covert facilities in Natanz and Fordow, along with revelations from defectors and international inspections, have only deepened Israel's suspicions. In 2018, Israel's Mossad intelligence agency famously smuggled out a vast archive of documents from Tehran, which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later presented to the world as proof of Iran's hidden nuclear weapons program. That operation not only exposed the technical details of Iran's plans, but also reinforced the idea that Tehran could never be trusted to abide by diplomatic agreements or international norms. These fears were central to Israel's opposition to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal, which was brokered in 2015 by the Obama administration along with other world powers. While much of the international community hailed the deal as a pragmatic step to delay Iran's nuclear capability in exchange for sanctions relief, Israel viewed it as a dangerous concession. Israeli leaders argued that the deal merely postponed Iran's nuclear breakout, allowing it to maintain infrastructure and research capabilities while gaining economic strength through sanctions relief. Worse still, from Israel's perspective, the agreement had sunset clauses, meaning that key restrictions on uranium enrichment would eventually expire, granting Iran a pathway to nuclear weapons legitimacy within a decade. This ticking clock scenario only heightened Israel's sense of urgency and isolation, leading to even greater skepticism toward international institutions and multilateral diplomacy. In response to what it views as an imminent and unacceptable threat, Israel has pursued a strategy of aggressive deterrence. This has included covert operations such as cyber attacks, most notably the Stuxnet virus, which disrupted Iranian centrifuges at Natanz, as well as targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists, many of whom have been killed under mysterious circumstances widely attributed to Israeli intelligence. These actions, though controversial on the world stage, are viewed domestically in Israel as necessary measures of self-defense. Israeli officials have consistently maintained that they will never allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon, with some going so far as to suggest that Israel would act alone, militarily, if the rest of the world failed to stop Iran's progress. The doctrine of preemption, as demonstrated in past operations such as the bombing of Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981 and Syria's Al-Kibar reactor in 2007, remains a foundational part of Israeli defense policy. Another layer of Israel's concern lies in the broader regional implications of a nuclear Iran. Israeli analysts argue that if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, it would trigger a regional arms race, prompting countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt to pursue their own nuclear capabilities. This proliferation would destabilize an already volatile region and increase the likelihood of nuclear materials falling into the hands of non-state actors, including terrorist groups. Furthermore, even if Iran never used a nuclear weapon, the mere possession of one would embolden its regional proxies and alter the balance of power across the Middle East. Hezbollah, already heavily armed and ideologically motivated, might act more aggressively under the protective umbrella of an Iranian nuclear deterrent. Hamas and Islamic Jihad could escalate their campaigns against Israel, knowing that Tehran holds a nuclear trump card that might deter full-scale Israeli retaliation. At the psychological level, the specter of a nuclear Iran creates a pervasive atmosphere of uncertainty and insecurity within Israeli society. Civil defense measures, missile drills, and contingency planning are not limited to military circles. They permeate schools, workplaces, and homes. The Israeli public lives with the awareness that, unlike many larger nations, a single nuclear strike could be catastrophically decisive. This vulnerability shapes everything from electoral politics to national discourse, creating a consensus across political lines that Iran's nuclear ambitions must be stopped by any means necessary. The fear is not abstract. It is embedded in the geography, the history, and the lived reality of a country that views its very existence as permanently under siege. The conflict between Iran and Israel cannot be fully understood without exploring the broader regional power struggle that defines the Middle East today. Both nations, in very different ways, seek to shape the future of the region according to their ideological, political, and strategic visions. This is not merely a battle over borders or specific policies. It is a struggle for influence, legitimacy, and dominance across a fractured and turbulent landscape. Iran aspires to be the vanguard of a Shiite-led resistance bloc that challenges Western presence and Sunni Arab monarchies, while Israel positions itself as a democratic, technologically advanced state, aligned with the West and determined to secure its survival in a hostile neighborhood. The rivalry between these two powers is embedded in proxy conflicts, diplomatic maneuvering, economic competition, and a growing arms race that has drawn in global powers and destabilized entire nations. Iran's regional ambitions are deeply rooted in the aftermath of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which fundamentally transformed its foreign policy. No longer merely a nation-state, Iran sees itself as a revolutionary force seeking to export its model of governance and ideology across the Muslim world. This ambition has manifested in the cultivation of proxy militias, support for armed movements, and the creation of strategic alliances that allow Tehran to extend its reach far beyond its borders. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and parts of Gaza have become battlegrounds for Iranian influence, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, playing a central role in organizing, funding, and training loyalist forces. Through these channels, Iran has constructed what many analysts refer to as the Shia Crescent, a corridor of influence stretching from Tehran to the Mediterranean, designed to counterbalance Sunni Arab powers and, crucially, to encircle Israel. Israel, viewing this expansion with mounting concern, has responded by strengthening its own regional alliances and military posture. Traditionally isolated in the Middle East, Israel has found new strategic partners among Sunni Arab nations that also perceive Iran as a growing threat. This realignment, most visibly expressed through the Abraham Accords, has reshaped the geopolitical map of the region. Nations like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan have normalized relations with Israel, forming a de facto alliance against Iran's regional ambitions. These agreements are not just about diplomacy, they are about intelligence sharing, joint defense planning, technological cooperation, and a shared desire to contain Iranian influence. Israel's growing ties with Saudi Arabia, though unofficial, signal a major shift in the balance of power and further highlight how the Iran-Israel conflict is part of a larger competition for regional dominance. The Syrian civil war is a vivid example of how this power struggle plays out in real terms. As the Assad regime began to collapse under the pressure of domestic rebellion and international condemnation, Iran quickly intervened, seeing an opportunity to preserve a key ally and to establish a military foothold closer to Israel's northern border. With the help of Hezbollah and other Shia militias, Iran propped up the Assad government and began constructing military infrastructure within Syria, including weapons factories, drone facilities, and command centers. Israel, perceiving this buildup as a direct threat, launched a campaign of preemptive airstrikes aimed at disrupting Iran's entrenchment. These strikes, often conducted without official acknowledgement, have become a routine feature of the conflict, with Israeli jets targeting convoys, depots, and IRGC personnel deep within Syrian territory. The Syrian battlefield has thus become a microcosm of the larger power struggle, a place where Iran asserts itself and Israel pushes back, both seeking to shape the post-war regional order in their favor. Another key arena in this contest is Iraq, where Iran has wielded immense influence since the U.S. invasion in 2003 created a power vacuum. Iranian-backed militias have become dominant players in Iraqi politics and security, often acting independently of the central government. These groups, many of which are trained and armed by the IRGC, have targeted U.S. forces, disrupted elections, and sought to extend Tehran's ideological reach. Israel views these developments with alarm, particularly as some of these militias have expressed solidarity with Hezbollah and Hamas, suggesting that Iran is building a multi-front strategy to pressure Israel on all sides. Israeli officials have also accused Iran of attempting to transfer advanced missile and drone technology through Iraq and Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon, thereby enhancing the group's strike capabilities. Even in the Red Sea and Gulf regions, the power struggle continues. Iran's support for the Houthi rebels in Yemen has created another front of confrontation. The Houthis have targeted Saudi infrastructure with Iranian-supplied drones and missiles, threatening the flow of oil and international shipping lanes. While Israel is not directly involved in Yemen, it understands the implications of Iranian control over such a strategic maritime corridor. In response, Israel has increased its naval presence in the Red Sea and forged deeper maritime cooperation with regional allies. This maritime dimension adds yet another layer to the broader competition, a competition that spans air, land, sea, and cyberspace. Cyber warfare has also become a central feature of the regional rivalry. Israel, known globally for its advanced cyber capabilities, has conducted numerous cyber operations targeting Iranian nuclear facilities, infrastructure, and intelligence networks. Iran, in turn, has launched cyber attacks against Israeli water systems, hospitals, and financial institutions. These digital skirmishes, though often kept under wraps, reflect the evolving nature of conflict in the modern era, where the battlefield extends into servers, satellites, and data networks. Both countries have invested heavily in cyber defense and offense, understanding that future wars may be fought as much with algorithms as with missiles. Ultimately, the power struggle between Iran and Israel is not confined to one arena or one issue. It is a layered and multidimensional confrontation that touches nearly every aspect of regional life, from religious identity and political ideology to military alliances and economic interests. Each side views the other not just as a rival, but as an obstacle to a vision of the Middle East that serves its own national and ideological interests. As long as these visions remain irreconcilable, and as long as both nations possess the capability and will to pursue them, the region will continue to be shaped by their shadow conflict, whether in the skies over Syria, the streets of Baghdad, the waters of the Gulf, or the diplomatic halls of distant capitals. The conflict between Iran and Israel does not exist in isolation. It is deeply entangled with the strategic interests of the United States and other global powers. At its core, this confrontation is not just about two rival nations in the Middle East. It is a flashpoint that affects energy markets, global security, arms control, diplomatic alliances, and the stability of international law. For decades, the United States has maintained a firm commitment to Israel's security, both as a matter of shared democratic values and as a strategic ally in a volatile region. At the same time, it has grappled with how to manage Iran's rise as a regional power without dragging itself into another prolonged military conflict. This balancing act has shaped U.S. foreign policy across multiple administrations and continues to drive diplomatic, military, and economic decisions with far-reaching global consequences. From a strategic standpoint, Israel is one of the United States' closest allies in the world, enjoying robust military, economic, and intelligence cooperation. The U.S. provides Israel with billions of dollars in annual military aid, advanced weapon systems, and political support in international forums. This alliance is not only about defense, but also about influence. Israel serves as a forward base of U.S. interests in the Middle East, sharing intelligence on terrorism, cooperating in cybersecurity, and acting as a counterbalance to hostile regimes. The U.S. commitment to Israel is also backed by a powerful domestic political consensus and strong lobbying efforts, making support for Israel a staple of American foreign policy regardless of partisan shifts in Washington. Iran, on the other hand, has been a source of tension and confrontation for the United States since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The hostage crisis that followed, combined with Iran's anti-American rhetoric and support for groups labeled as terrorist organizations by the U.S. government, laid the foundation for decades of hostility. Since then, Iran has positioned itself as an anti-imperialist force in the region, challenging U.S. influence through a network of alliances and proxy militias. Washington has responded with economic sanctions, military containment, and diplomatic pressure aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional activities. However, these measures have not deterred Iran from asserting itself, and the cycle of escalation has drawn in U.S. military resources, strategic attention, and diplomatic capital time and again. The nuclear issue represents the most acute intersection of U.S., Israeli, and global interess. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, signed in 2015 under the Obama administration, was a major diplomatic effort to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons by imposing strict limits on its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. While much of the international community saw the deal as a milestone for non-proliferation, Israel staunchly opposed it, viewing it as dangerously lenient and temporary. The Trump administration eventually withdrew from the agreement in 2018, reimposing harsh sanctions on Iran and adopting a maximum pressure campaign that further strained U.S.-Iran relations. This move was welcomed in Tel Aviv, but condemned by European allies, highlighting how divergent global interests have become on this issue. The failure to restore the deal in subsequent years has left a diplomatic vacuum, during which Iran has expanded its nuclear enrichment activities, inching closer to weapons-grade capability and increasing the urgency of the crisis for both the U.S. and Israel. Beyond the nuclear file, the U.S. is deeply concerned with maintaining freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply flows. Iran's threats to disrupt this passage through its naval maneuvers and periodic attacks on oil tankers present a serious risk to global energy markets and economic stability. The U.S. Navy maintains a significant presence in the Gulf region to deter such threats and ensure maritime security, a commitment that has led to periodic skirmishes and standoffs with Iranian vessels. These tensions underscore how the Iran-Israel conflict, when filtered through the lens of U.S. and global interests, quickly escalates into broader concerns about energy security, international trade, and military confrontation. Global powers beyond the U.S. also have significant stakes in this conflict. European nations, for instance, have tried to preserve the nuclear deal as a means of avoiding war and maintaining economic engagement with Iran. Russia and China, meanwhile, have increasingly positioned themselves as counterweights to U.S. influence in the region, expanding their diplomatic and military ties with Tehran. China, in particular, has become a major importer of Iranian oil and a supporter of multilateral efforts that exclude Western dominance. Its recent efforts to broker a normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia further demonstrate Beijing's growing ambitions in the Middle East. These developments complicate the strategic calculus for both the U.S. and Israel, as they suggest that Iran is not diplomatically isolated and may find powerful partners to offset Western pressure. The role of international institutions such as the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, also comes into play. These organizations are tasked with monitoring compliance with nuclear agreements, enforcing sanctions, and promoting diplomatic resolutions to conflicts. However, their effectiveness is often hampered by political divisions among member states, especially when permanent Security Council members hold opposing views. The Iran-Israel conflict thus exposes the limits of the international system's ability to mediate high-stakes rivalries, particularly when they involve ideologically driven actors and nuclear capabilities. In essence, the Iran-Israel confrontation is a geopolitical fault line where local animosities intersect with global interests, creating a volatile mixture of religious rivalry, nationalist ambition, and superpower competition. The United States, as a key player, finds itself navigating a complex terrain where its commitment to Israel, concern over nuclear proliferation, and desire to avoid military entanglement are often in conflict. At the same time, global powers like Russia and China are reshaping the diplomatic landscape, while international organizations struggle to keep pace. This multi-layered dynamic ensures that any escalation between Iran and Israel has the potential to ripple across the globe, impacting everything from energy prices and defense strategies to diplomatic alliances and the fragile architecture of international security. For years, the tension between Iran and Israel has existed in what many analysts have called a shadow war, a conflict fought through espionage, cyber attacks, assassinations, proxy battles, and covert operations that rarely spill into full-scale military confrontation. This clandestine struggle has unfolded beneath the surface of global headlines, operating in gray zones where attribution is murky and deniability remains plausible. However, in recent years, that shadow war has increasingly crept into the daylight, shedding its cloak of ambiguity and transforming into more visible, direct confrontations. The escalation of tactics, frequency of attacks, and overt acknowledgments by both nations reveal a sobering reality. The shadow war is no longer confined to the shadows. It is becoming real, more dangerous, and more likely to spiral into open warfare with profound implications for the Middle East and beyond. This transformation has been driven in large part by a shift in operational daring and technological capability. Israel, long known for its intelligence prowess, has moved from subtle sabotage to bold, high-profile operations. In 2018, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly revealed a covert Israeli operation that smuggled hundreds of thousands of nuclear documents out of Tehran, showcasing Mossad's deep penetration of Iranian intelligence networks. This was not just an intelligence victory, it was a public statement, a psychological operation aimed at demonstrating Israel's reach and its willingness to act preemptively. Similarly, the series of assassinations targeting Iranian nuclear scientists, such as the 2020 killing of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was considered the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, bore the hallmarks of highly sophisticated planning, advanced technology, and insider access. While Israel never officially claimed responsibility, its fingerprints were widely acknowledged, and the message was clear. The shadow war would continue, but its consequences would now be made visible to the world. Iran, too, has adapted its strategy, showing greater willingness to retaliate and engage in more provocative actions. Its network of regional proxies, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, have stepped up their activities in alignment with Tehran's broader strategy of encircling Israel and deterring its operations. Iran-backed groups have launched rockets into Israeli territory, planted explosives near border regions, and attacked Israeli-linked shipping vessels in international waters. These acts, though often attributed to non-state actors, are deeply entwined with Iran's state policy. They allow Tehran to apply pressure on Israel without directly confronting it militarily, though the line between indirect and direct conflict continues to blur. One of the most visible arenas in which the shadow war has become increasingly real is in Syria. Since the outbreak of the civil war, Syria has become a battleground for regional power plays, with Iran investing heavily in support of Bashar al-Assad's regime. Iran's goal was not merely to preserve an ally, but to build a military infrastructure near Israel's border, including missile depots, drone launch sites, and bases for IRGC and Hezbollah forces. In response, Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes inside Syrian territory, targeting Iranian supply routes and weapons shipments. These strikes are often publicly acknowledged, a significant shift from Israel's historical posture of strategic ambiguity. The normalization of Israeli air operations in Syria underscores how the once covert conflict has become institutionalized and openly militarized. Each strike carries the risk of Iranian retaliation, the death of IRGC personnel, and potential miscalculations that could ignite a larger war. Cyber warfare has also been a prominent front in the evolution of this conflict. Israel's role in the deployment of the Stuxnet virus, which disrupted Iran's nuclear centrifuges at Natanz, marked a turning point in global cyber conflict. Since then, both sides have invested heavily in cyber capabilities, targeting critical infrastructure, banking systems, and strategic industries. Iranian hackers have attempted to infiltrate Israeli water treatment facilities, public transit systems, and hospitals, aiming to disrupt civilian life and sow fear. In turn, Israel has responded with cyber strikes that paralyze Iranian port operations or expose sensitive government data. What was once a tool for espionage has now become a weapon of direct attack, used not just to gather intelligence, but to degrade national security and public trust.